let's go right to understanding the abstraction that is Wall Street also stands for something else, for an inhuman kind of power. Okay, we know this. So, how can you occupy an abstraction or occupy a sentiment or a thought? Perhaps only with another abstraction. Occupy Wall Street took over a more or less public park and has now developed a library, a school, workshops, a type of hospital, a financial center, an arts and culture committee, um, other facilitating communities, communities to facilitate that community, a whole general assembly pedagogy, workshops to teach that. They now have accrued $40,000, which means they're now going to have to create their own system of government. Melanie Klein spoke with them today. So it may sound counterintuitive, but really there is no politics in the United States. There is exploitation, oppression, inequality, violence, and there are rumors that there may not really be a state. Hearing that Chase Manhattan Bank has donated millions to the Chicago Police Department tells me that everything's being ensured that the police do not revolt against their own police state. But there is no politics. This is pure imperialism. There's only the semblance of politics. This is also where intellectuals have failed us, because they continue to talk about politics. What we have now is a growing movement that's an abstraction. So no wonder it hasn't quite moved out of a lemonade stand ethos in some states, and then in other states like Occupy Wall Street, it is a community within a community. So the genius of the occupation is simply to suggest that there could be a politics, meaning that tonight at the General Assembly on Wall Street, Occupy, there was direct democracy, but there was also conflict. As Occupy Wall Street continues to grow and the Occupy movements to grow, so will this idea of an abstraction. So Wall Street is a name for an abstraction with the double sense of a rentier class which uses vectoral power to control resources that bypass political processes, which at least had to negotiate with popular interests. A growing populist movement is what's happening, but not completely. Against this, the occupation proposes another abstraction, and it too has a double aspect. On the one hand, it is a physical thing, a taking of space. This has confused the New York Police Department, which has responded with clumsy tactics, ungraceful tactics, violent, disorganized tactics to see the New York Police Department just as confused on their cell phones as well, not knowing who is really in power, seeing when some police officers are actually so confused that they resort to violence themselves. This is a growing abstraction. The taking of a tiny square in downtown New York hardly impinges on the power of the vector, so we know what we're talking about there. But the mainstream media doesn't quite know how to deal with this. It's actually having to examine how news is made. Because this is an internet protest, if you watch the live stream, there's also such a confluence of information that it's difficult to see what's happening live and what's being taped. There's so much glitch and so much disruption that it becomes a sound piece. It becomes a video piece. Occupy is becoming even more abstract in that it's becoming kind of an art form. An occupation is conceptually the opposite of a movement, and yet we want to call this a movement, or is it an occupation? So already we have something where we don't understand what our identity is. A movement is aimed for some internal consistency within itself, but uses space just as a place to park its ranks. An occupation has no internal consistency in its ranks, but chooses meaningful spaces which have significant resonance into the abstract terrain of symbolic geography. Let's talk about symbolic geography, because here in Chicago, we complied with the Chicago Police Department, and we had to disband the media team and the media tent. We're told we can't occupy down at the border of trade, and so now headquarters is held in all these different places. Because this new phase of mobility, which has happened in other cities as well, now Occupy, it as an abstraction, is going to need to be kind of specialized within each state. Not everything's going to be able to have the pull that Occupy Wall Street has. But if occupation is a little confusing for intellectuals, or us intellectuals, as the article says, take pity on the poor billionaire mayor. Bloomberg suggests that occupation was inconveniencing regular bankers struggling with a mere $40,000 to $50,000 per year. But already, Occupy Wall Street has earned $40,000 in donations and continues to. So, as to how this all plays out, nobody knows. That's how it is weird. This is not a book, it is an internet. The NYPD do not really know how to handle this because it is so abstract. Once this abstraction reaches a certain level of movement and less becoming an occupation, we have to consider, what is it that we're preoccupied with right now? There are many people who are misinformed and don't even really know about the occupations. And then there are many that are joining the protesters every day, doing what they can. And then there are many that are holding down the fort, so to speak. It's not quite a chess game in every state, but it is in a lot of states where police execute control for one thing, step back, then execute control for another thing. So there's this amazing game of chess that everyone's playing. Again, more abstraction. Of course, it's Duchamp that loves to play chess. It's the intellectuals that play chess. But this movement and occupation, which I would say it's two things at once, is a radical gesture because it's never been seen before, and we've never had an internet protest with media savvy. So what do? Do we stay preoccupied, or do we join and form a movement? At this point, it's an abstraction. At this point, it becomes something that's gathering momentum and growing organically. It's also something that many people are afraid of, including the Chicago Police Department, including the New York Police Department, and all of the hundreds of occupies throughout the world. And yet, I also see how the police departments in many states are really working with this idea of an occupation, because they also realize they are part of the 99%. There is really all of us in the 99%. So do we globalize and become this movement, which seems to be what's happening with this idea of occupation and occupying space in order to prove a point? But what I've noticed is that we're proving a point on these street corners, these rallies, these protests. But it's more that we're proving that we really need to converse. We need a dialogue. But as Melanie Klein said tonight, Naomi Klein, that we need to look at this and not see it as group therapy. Obviously, we're in a state, a trauma state, as a society, as a culture, as a nation, and as a world, and as a body, collectively, that's traumatized. It's clear we live in a trauma unit. Everyone's preoccupied. Some people are preoccupied in not being part of the movement, and some people are choosing to join the movement in whichever way they can. But in any case, we should really address what is preoccupation.